I remember the exact moment I first watched this music video. It still hits. It's such a cool moment, but what is even happening in that intro exactly? Also, if you recognize this trend, does it feel like that's something that started happening overnight and then just as fast churches just decided to stop doing it? Now, honestly, sometimes it does feel like trends in worship music change faster than you could possibly ever get one of those giant brimmed hats delivered to your door. Is worship music just that unoriginal that it just rides trends and picks things up and puts them down just as fast based on whatever happens to feel cool or popular in the moment? Let's talk about it. I want to use this specific example, figure out what the heck is going on, and is this something that churches just rode the wave of and then abandoned? Or is there something else going on here? So if you're not familiar with that song, it's a song Real Love by Hillsong Young and Free. It was released in 2016, and that's the live performance version of the song. So it features that sort of extended intro. You see him sort of playing this thing. It has pads on it. That's actually a sampler. It's designed to play back, record, manipulate samples, little short audio clips. And in this specific case, what he's triggering, we would call vocal samples, or perhaps vocal chops, just depending on your preferred terminology. And so that's the trend I want to talk about, the trend of using vocal samples or vocal chops. Now, leave a comment and let me know, is this a trend that your church hopped onto once Hillsong Young and Free started doing it so much around 2015, 2016 especially? I know that for me, for a while as a worship leader, especially when I would lead youth services, I tried to use vocal samples wherever I could because it just seemed fresh, it seemed new. But I'm curious if that's something that you did too. So do leave a comment and let me know. Has your church used this sort of vocal sample, vocal chop thing? A sample is just a selection, a little sample of an audio file. A chop is a bit of an audio file that's been chopped out of a larger performance. So most of the time these files, these vocal samples, are pulled from oftentimes the lead vocal of a song. They'll find specific phrases, vowels, words, riffs, runs, whatever. They'll take those out of the original performance. They'll manipulate them, apply reverb, distortion, compression, EQ. Oftentimes, most distinctively, they will pitch them up or down. So they'll actually be played back higher or lower, or sometimes they'll just shift the timbre of the sound. So it might be the original pitch, but they've actually shifted the timbre of the sound up or down. It's kind of a vocoding sort of effect. It's hard to explain. It's really not the focus of this video. The idea is, though, that these original recordings get chopped up, samples get pulled out, those samples get manipulated, they get reprocessed, and then sort of worked back into the song in unique ways. So for this specific example, Real Love, it's that it's wavery, I can't do it, but you can actually hear the original origin of that sample if you listen to this song. In the pre-chorus of the song, Alexander Pappas sings the word "oh" a couple of times. If I'm not mistaken, I wasn't there in the room, but I'm pretty sure I can discern that those original recordings, the original performance of the lead vocal, was then chopped up, processed, and became that iconic sample that sort of serves as the lead part of the song. So I find vocal samples really interesting. I mean, sampling in general to me as a sound designer is fascinating. It's something that I love doing. The concept of taking something that was intended for one purpose and making something new and unique and discovering what else that sound can do, I think is really cool. In that video, they're triggering the samples from just a sampler. It's basically drum pads connected to the playback of those sounds. But you can play these parts from the keyboard if you have similar sounds ready to go. And inside of Sunday Keys, I've got a preset pulled up now. It sounds like this. It actually plays back 4 different samples in a round robin, which just means a circle. So it plays 1 sample, 2, 3, 4, and then the cycle repeats. This is really cool because based on the notes that you play, you get a different result each time. It feels like the instrument sort of plays itself in a unique way. I've got a synth bass in the left hand. Check out how these two sound together. So yeah, that's the exact same sort of vibe. It's doing the same thing sonically as that little clip of the video we watched at the beginning, but I'm doing it from the keyboard, and I could use this in different kinds of songs. It's a really interesting sound design choice, and I think it's really cool if you can find a way to have it be playable and accessible within your keyboard instrument to be able to pull these things out live, sort of substituting or serving as lead parts. So once Young and Free started doing this, that whole album Youth Revival is chock full of vocal samples. Lots of other worship artists took note, and of course this was a trend in pop music in general as well, and it started to show up in lots of worship music. As recently as 2021, Phil Wickham's song House of the Lord features a vocal sample quite prominently in that broken down intro, and then every time that intro repeats. So I've got another patch here that features a different vocal sample or vocal chop in the right hand, and it's just layered with the piano, so you get the general idea of how this works. Check this out. Make it brighter. So here's just the chop. I'm going to take the piano out so you can hear it. So the original source of this vocal sample was the word O being sung, but then it's processed, pitched around, and sort of mangled up to have this really airy, breathy quality, and you still have that O vowel shape too. And then layered in with that piano, I just think it's really cool. So here's one thing I want to know. Oftentimes when churches play House of the Lord live, they might just have the electric guitar do that part, or the vocal sample might just be in the backing tracks if your church uses backing tracks, if you play along or with backing tracks. So I'm curious, leave a comment. Does your church actually play this part live? Does the keys player do it? Does the guitarist do it? Or do you let the tracks handle it? There's not a wrong answer here. I'm just kind of curious to poll you folks watching this video and find out if you're actually doing these kinds of sounds live, or maybe you'd like to and now you're considering maybe doing it for the first time. So as recently as 3 years ago, I noticed this on popular, top 10 worship songs. But then from there, I don't know, did everybody just decide collectively this isn't cool anymore? So did this trend just die out that fast, or is there something a bit more subtle going on? We're always diving into sort of the minutia, the sonic minutia of songs. Like, what are the very specific production decisions that are going into these songs? And so for us, it's a little bit easier, I think, to notice when a trend comes out strong, right? I mean, in Real Love, it's the absolute forefront, the center of every part of the song when there's not a lead vocal is that, ah! It's so, ah! That part is really central to the song. In House of the Lord, it's still there, but you've got other instruments layering it. And then from there, it's harder and harder for me to point to songs, unless they're maybe very specifically trying to do like a techno worship or a youth group worship thing. The trend has mellowed out. And if you don't pay much attention, it's just stopped, full stop. But what I've actually seen, and this has happened in other trends as well that have come and sort of gone, using vocal chops and vocal samples hasn't gone away. It's been folded into the general palette of production techniques that modern worship bands and artists are using. So what I mean is some of the ideas, the concepts of using vocal samples and chops has now just become part of the toolkit. So when I listen to some more recent songs, I don't often hear that big vocal chop. This is the lead instrument. This is the lead synthesizer solo of the song. But I do hear this production technique used in more subtle ways. We've actually seen this happen before with our electric guitar friends. When guitarists first started using overdriven guitar into a great tube amplifier with dotted eighth note delay, it was the forefront of every worship song for maybe half a decade. That was just the sound that everybody was into, that everybody wanted to hear on every song. Those concepts, warm tube amplifiers, dotted eighth notes, or delayed guitar signals in general, that's now just such a normal part of worship music that it's in every song practically, but it's no longer the defining character trait of that song. And that's what I think is happening with the use of vocal samples and vocal chops. Let me give you an example that I found. This is a live performance from Cody Carnes performing Firm Foundation at the Belonging Co. Listen to this intro and see if you hear what I hear. You hear that? Right away. Lots of ambience. So what I hear is that idea of this airy sort of vocal sample being a synthetic element, a layered texture in the mix, being really sort of just this progression from right here, big aggressive vocal chop, to we're going to layer it in with our lead sounds, to we're going to layer it in with the character of the song itself, to where it's no longer standing up top, but it is just a general part of the mix. It's kind of part of the glue, really. As trends come and go, we don't really just abandon them entirely in worship music. They get folded in to the broader palette, the broader context of what we know we're capable of doing as musicians. I think this is a less cynical take because a lot of people criticize worship music for being unoriginal, for being like trend hopping from one thing to the other. Whatever pop music is doing, worship music is doing 5 years later. I understand that critique to a certain point. I guess I'm curious if you think that critique holds water or not. But I think if you consider that we do notice what's happening in popular music in general. We take notes, we find inspiration from other art that people are putting their God-given creativity into. We try these trends for a while, and then they fold into the bigger picture of what worship music is. And at its best, I would be hopeful that worship music is a representation of the body of Christ, right? Just a ton of creatives, a ton of musicians, a ton of people putting effort and their musical abilities, which I also believe come from God, into their artistry. And that results in, yes, sources of inspiration rising and then falling and sort of mellowing out into a broader context. So let's rebuild this sort of vibe. I'm gonna go to a new patch and let's see if we can do this same sort of thing for Firm Foundation. So I'm gonna bring in a grand piano. I'm gonna choose this extra soft room piano. Okay, so we're in B flat. Okay, so I know I need sort of a pad to hold everything together. Definitely heard that. I'm gonna just search for a pad that I know is really dry and that will serve this purpose well. So now I've got a piano and pad combination. I'm gonna take this inspiration of the vocal samples and bring this in to this sort of basic meat and potatoes sound. So I'm going to pull in two more sounds. These are both from a sound library called Vocality. And this is something brand new. We'll talk more about it in a second. But I'm going to grab a pad sound from Vocality first. This is all about that idea of like, what does it look like for the trend to settle in to worship music in general? Here's what this sounds like. Okay, and then I'm going to add one more. This one is called falsetto chop. Now this is a vocal chop, so it is a like a little slice of a performance, but it's sort of spaced out in ambient. Especially in the mix. So here we go. So you see what I mean when I'm talking about this is no longer like, ah, there it is again. It's not this big bright statement, but it's more of just a subtle feeling of, wow, there's some human quality to the ambience of this song, this sort of ethereal vocal feeling. And I think that is really where this trend has settled for me and how I hear it still transpiring in worship music. And I think it's really, really cool. The vocal sounds I've been using so far in this video are all from a single sound library, which is brand new, called Vocality. Now, this is an Ultimate exclusive sound library, which means it's only available to folks who have an active Sunday Keys Ultimate license. The long and short of it is, if you have an active Sunday Keys Ultimate license, you get a brand new sound library that's exclusive to the Ultimate license every quarter. And this quarter's release is called Vocality, and it's full of these kinds of vocal samples, vocal chops, vocal leads, and vocal pad sounds. So if you have an active Sunday Keys Ultimate license right now, Vocality is actually available to you to download in app format, Mainstage, and Ableton Live format. Vocality as a library seeks to fill the space that vocal samples are now filling in modern worship music, and also inspired by those great vocal lead sounds, those big aggressive chops that have sort of been in and out of worship music. I think there's still a place. And honestly, with the way that trends work, who knows when these things will come and go. I think they can layer in the mix really well. So Vocality tries to cover a lot of that sonic ground. I think it does a really good job. When you purchase a Sunday Keys Ultimate license, you'll receive an immediate download of Vocality, as well as the previous Ultimate exclusive called Daylight Strings. We'll put a link in the description if you'd like to learn more about that release. And there's a link in the description to a page where you can hear audio demos of Vocality if you'd like to check it out more for yourself.